vessel. You have entered space claimed by the Galactic Dominion. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in immediate destruction. Danny looked at Jake with wide eyes. Jake, what do we do? Jake stared at the massive ships surrounding them. He thought about his options. There were not many. The Lone Star had no weapons that could scratch those warships. Running was impossible. They were completely trapped. But Jake Morrison had never been good at giving up. Danny, take Maria and get to the escape pods. Set the autopilot for the nearest human outpost. What about you? Someone needs to stay and keep them busy. Someone needs to make sure you get away. Jake put his hand on Danny's shoulder. I'll be fine. I've been in worse situations. This was a lie. But Danny did not need to know that. Danny wanted to argue. Jake could see it in his eyes. But after years of friendship, Danny knew when Jake had made up his mind. He nodded once, grabbed Maria the engineer, and ran for the escape pods. Jake sat down in the pilot's chair and opened a channel to the alien fleet. This is Jake Morrison of the salvage vessel Lone Star. I'm a citizen of the United States of America, Earth. I don't know who you are or what you want, but I'm not going to just roll over because you told me to. You want my ship? Come and take it. There was silence for a moment. Then the cold voice returned, sounding confused. You are refusing to surrender? Your vessel has no weapons. Your species is unknown to us. You cannot win. Jake smiled, though no one could see it. Winning isn't the point. Where I come from, we have a saying, give me liberty or give me death. You're about to find out what that means. He watched the radar screen as the escape pods launched and flew away. The alien ships let them go. They were focused on him, on this strange, small creature who spoke to them without fear. Jake flew the Lone Star in circles, dodging the first few shots the aliens fired. He knew he could not dodge forever. The ship was too slow, and there were too many enemies. But every second he survived was another second for Danny and Maria to get further away. Finally, a shot hit the engines. The Lone Star shuddered and stopped moving. Jake felt the ship being pulled toward the largest alien vessel by some kind of invisible force. A tractor beam, he realized. The door of the cockpit exploded inward. Alien soldiers poured through, huge reptilian creatures in black armor. They were at least 7 feet tall, with scales the color of dried blood and eyes that showed no emotion at all. Jake stood up slowly and raised his hands, but he did not kneel. He did not beg. He looked the lead soldier directly in the eyes. I hope you boys know what you just got yourselves into. The soldier hit him hard across the face. Jake fell to the ground, tasting blood, but he laughed, a short and bitter sound. That's the best you got? They dragged him off his ship and into the alien vessel. As they pulled him through long, dark hallways, Jake paid attention to everything. He counted doors. He memorized turns. He watched the soldiers and learned how they moved. Commander Vetharak was waiting in a large room filled with screens and strange machines. He was the biggest of the reptilians, wearing armor decorated with symbols that probably meant he was important. He looked at Jake like a scientist looks at an insect. I am Commander Vetharak of the Galactic Dominion. Your species has not been contacted before. You will provide information about your homeworld. If you cooperate, you will be treated well. If you resist, you will suffer. Jake spat blood on the floor. He looked up at the massive alien commander with a grin that had no fear in it. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm from a little place called Texas. And buddy, you have no idea what you just started. The commander did not understand. He would learn. They all would. Jake woke up on a cold metal floor. His head hurt, and his mouth tasted like copper. For a moment, he did not know where he was. Then the memories came back. The alien ships, the capture, the giant reptilian commander. He sat up slowly and looked around. He was in a cell, but it was the strangest cell he had ever seen. The room was huge, designed for creatures much bigger than him. The ceiling was 20 feet high. The bed, if you could call it that, was a metal slab that could fit 4 humans. Everything was built for giants. Jake stood up and began to explore. He touched the walls, searching for weak points. He examined the door, a thick sheet of metal with no handle on the inside. He looked up at the ceiling and saw small holes that might be cameras or vents or something else entirely. A soldier once told Jake that the first 24 hours of captivity were the most important. That was when you had to decide what kind of prisoner you were going to be. Were you going to break, or were you going to fight? Jake had already made his choice. The door opened with a hiss. 4 guards entered, each one carrying a weapon that looked like it could put a hole through a tank. They surrounded Jake and gestured for him to follow. Jake did not move. "I can walk on my own, thanks. No need to push." The guards looked at each other. They did not understand his words, but they understood his tone. One of them reached out and grabbed Jake's arm. What happened next surprised everyone, including Jake. He twisted, using a move he had learned in Marine combat training. The guard was much bigger than him, but size means nothing if you do not expect resistance. Jake broke free and put distance between himself and the aliens. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The guards stared at this tiny creature who had just escaped their grip. Jake stared back at them, breathing hard, fists raised. Then they all attacked at once. Jake fought well, he really did. But 4 against 1, when each enemy weighed 5 times as much as you, was not a fight you could win. They took him down hard, pinning him to the ground with their heavy boots. But Jake was smiling when they lifted him up, because now he knew something important. They could be surprised. They could be caught off guard. And that was useful information. They took him to a different room. This one was white and bright and filled with machines that hummed with strange energy. A new alien was waiting for him. She was different from the soldiers, thinner. Her scales were silver instead of red. Her eyes were cold but curious. "I am High Arbiter Solen," she said through a device that translated her words into English. "I am responsible for gathering information from new species. You will answer my questions." Jake was pushed into a chair. Metal bands wrapped around his wrists and ankles, holding him in place. "Let me explain your situation," Solen continued. "The Galactic Dominion has existed for 10,000 years. We have conquered 647 species. Not one of them has ever resisted successfully. Not one. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Jake nodded slowly. "You're telling me you've never met Americans before?" Solen tilted her head. "Americans? Is this the name of your species?" "It's where I come from. A country on my planet. Used to be a colony, actually. Belonged to the biggest empire on Earth at the time. They had the best army, the best navy, more money and power than anyone else." "And your people served this empire?" Jake laughed. "For a while. Then we got tired of being told what to do. So we told them to leave. They said no. So we made them leave." Solen leaned forward, interested despite herself. "You defeated a superior military force? Took a few years. Wasn't easy. A lot of good people died. We froze in the winter. We starved. We lost more battles than we won. But we kept fighting because we believed that freedom was worth dying for. And in the end, we won." The High Arbiter was quiet for a moment. Then she shook her head. "A primitive story. Your people defeated another primitive nation. The Dominion is not primitive. We have technology beyond your understanding. We have conquered worlds with populations in the billions. Your resistance is not brave. It is simply foolish." Jake shrugged as much as his restraints would allow. "Maybe, but foolish is kind of our thing." Solen turned to one of her machines. "We will now perform a neural scan. This will allow us to see your memories and extract information about your homeworld. The process can be painless if you relax. If you fight it, you will experience significant discomfort. A metal device lowered from the ceiling and attached to Jake's head. He felt a strange pressure behind his eyes, like someone was pushing on his brain from the inside. Solon watched her screens with growing confusion. "This is unusual," she muttered. "Your brain structure is different from expected. There is a great deal of activity in the regions associated with stubbornness and determination. Lady, you have no idea." She pushed deeper into his mind. Jake felt memories rising up, playing like movies he could not control. But they were not the memories she was looking for. She saw his grandfather, 90 years old, showing Jake a faded photograph of young men on a beach. Normandy, 1944. She saw his great-grandmother, a tiny woman with iron in her spine, describing how her grandmother crossed 1,000 miles of wilderness in a wooden wagon. She saw Jake at 18 standing in front of a flag, swearing an oath to defend his country. She saw him at 25, carrying a wounded friend through a desert while bullets flew overhead. She saw generations of people who refused to quit, refused to kneel, refused to accept that anything was impossible. Solon pulled back from the scan, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking. "What are you?" she whispered. Jake opened his eyes. Blood was dripping from his nose, but he was still smiling. "I told you, I'm an American. We're a people who looked at impossible odds and said, yeah. But what if we try anyway? And you know what the funny thing is? We usually figure it out." Solon stared at him for a long time. Then she turned to the guards. "Take him back to his cell. I need to study these results." As they dragged him away, Jake felt something that might have been hope. The scan had hurt, but it had also shown him something important. They were afraid. They just did not know it yet. Days passed slowly in the Dominion ship. Jake could not see the sun or the stars from his cell, so he counted time by the meals they brought him. The food was strange, purple and green things that tasted like nothing he recognized. But he ate it anyway. A man needed his strength. Every day they took him to the White Room. Every day Solon tried something new. On the third day, she tried pain. They had machines that could stimulate every nerve in his body at once. The pain was worse than anything Jake had ever felt. It was like being burned and frozen and crushed all at the same time. Most prisoners broke within minutes. Jake lasted 4 hours, not because he was special, not because he was stronger than other people, but because when he was 19 years old, he fell off a horse and broke his leg in 3 places. The nearest hospital was 50 miles away. Jake set the bone himself with a stick and some rope, then drove himself to town in a truck with no power steering. Pain was just pain. It hurt, but it ended. And as long as it ended, Jake could survive it. When they finally stopped, Solène looked at him with something that might have been respect. "How?" she asked. "How do you endure this?" Jake's voice was rough from screaming, but he still managed to speak. "My granddad used to say that pain is just weakness leaving the body. I guess I had a lot of weakness to get rid of." On the 5th day, she tried sensory deprivation. They put him in a room with no light, no sound, no sensation at all. Most species went mad within hours. The brain needed input. Without it, it began to eat itself. Jake stayed in that room for 3 days. He survived by filling the silence with noise from his own memory. He recited the Constitution, every word, from the beginning to the end. When he finished that, he moved on to the Declaration of Independence, then the Gettysburg Address. Then every song he could remember, from country ballads to rock anthems to hymns his mother used to sing on Sunday mornings. When they finally opened the door, Jake was sitting cross-legged on the floor, quietly singing about a man named Johnny and a fiddle made of gold. Solène was waiting for him outside. "You should have broken," she said. "Every psychological model predicted complete mental collapse after 40 hours. You lasted 72. Jake blinked in the sudden light. That song has like 20 verses. You could have left me in there longer. On the 8th day, she tried psychological manipulation. They showed him images on a big screen. Earth burning, cities destroyed, oceans boiling, his family dead, his friends dead, everyone he ever loved, gone. Jake watched the images without expression. When they finished, Solon leaned forward eagerly. Your planet has been destroyed. Your species is extinct. You are the last one. There is no reason to resist anymore. Tell us what we want to know, and we will give you a comfortable life. Jake looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at Solon. That's Houston, he said, pointing to a burning city in one of the images. Yes, your city of Houston has been... The skyline's wrong. You got buildings in the wrong place, and that's not how the freeways connect. Jake smiled, showing teeth. Nice try, though. You almost got the colors right. Solen's scales flushed dark with anger. She nodded to one of the guards. The guard stepped forward and hit Jake across the face. It was a hard blow, backed by hundreds of pounds of muscle and armor. Jake felt something crack in his chest. Ribs, probably. He fell to the ground, gasping for breath. Blood poured from his mouth. For a moment, he just lay there, trying to remember how to breathe. Then he looked up at the guard. My grandmother hit harder than that, he said, and she was 87 years old, blind in one eye, too. The guard moved to hit him again, but Solon raised her hand to stop him. Enough! She walked over to Jake and knelt down beside him. Her silver eyes studied his face like she was looking at a puzzle she could not solve. Why do you do this? You know you cannot escape. You know your resistance is meaningless. Why do you continue to fight? Jake coughed, and more blood came up. But he met her eyes without flinching. You really don't understand, do you? This isn't strategy. This isn't logic. This is just who we are. My people spent 200 years fighting for freedom. We fought empires. We fought dictators. We fought anyone who tried to tell us what to think or how to live. Sometimes we lost, lots of times we lost, but we never stopped. He pushed himself up to a sitting position, ignoring the screaming pain in his ribs. You can hurt me. You can break my body, but you can't break what's in here. He tapped his chest. Because this isn't just me. This is everyone who came before me. Every soldier who ever bled for that flag. Every immigrant who crossed an ocean for a chance at something better. Every farmer and teacher and factory worker who believed that tomorrow could be better than today. You're not fighting one man. You're fighting all of them. Solon stood up slowly. For the first time since Jake had met her, she looked uncertain. Take him back to his cell, she said quietly, and have the medical unit look at those ribs. I need him alive. As the guards dragged him away, Jake kept his eyes open. He counted doors. He watched the guards' routines. He noticed which ones were alert and which ones were bored. 16 days he had been on this ship. 16 days of pain and darkness and mind games. A normal person would have given up by now. But Jake Morrison was not a normal person. He was an American, and Americans did not give up. In his cell that night, Jake lay on his metal bed and stared at the ceiling. His body hurt everywhere. His ribs were cracked. His nose had been broken and badly healed. He had lost at least 20 pounds from the bad food and constant stress. But in his mind, he was free, and he had a plan. On the 21st day, Jake was ready. He had spent every moment of the last 3 weeks preparing. When they moved him through the hallways, he memorized the route. When guards spoke to each other, he listened and learned their language. When they gave him food, he saved small pieces and hid them in his clothes. But most importantly, he studied the cell. The Dominion had built this ship to hold dangerous aliens, creatures with thick hides and powerful muscles. Creatures with claws and fangs and poison. They had designed every system to handle brute force. They had never considered a species that solved problems differently. Jake's food tray was made of a thin metal, strong but light. Over many meals, he had bent one edge back and forth, weakening it until a small, sharp piece broke off. It was not much, about the size of his thumb, but it was enough. He had also been watching the door panel. Every time the guards entered, they pressed their hand against a glowing square on the wall. The square was connected to the door by a thin cable that ran along the ceiling. Jake had noticed that the cable passed through a small gap in the metal plates, and where there was a gap, there was a weakness. On the 21st day, when the guards came to take him for another interrogation, Jake was ready. He let them put the restraints on his wrists. He walked with them down the hallway, counting steps like he always did. They passed through 2 security doors and turned left into a corridor that Jake knew led to the medical bay. That was when he made his move. He stumbled, pretending to fall. The guard on his right reached down to pull him up. In that moment, Jake twisted, sliding his hands out of the restraints. They were designed for wrists much bigger than his, and with enough twisting and some pain, a human could slip free. The guard did not expect resistance. None of them ever did. Jake grabbed the guard's weapon, a heavy pistol-like device. He did not know how to use it properly, but he knew where the trigger was. He pointed it at the other guard and pulled. The shot was loud, louder than any gun on Earth. The guard went down with a smoking hole in his leg. Not dead, but definitely not fighting anymore. The first guard recovered and lunged at Jake. But Jake was not trying to win a fair fight. He had learned a long time ago that fair fights were for people with advantages. He dropped low, letting the guard's momentum carry him overhead, and then ran. The alarm started within seconds. Red lights flashed in the corridor. Voices shouted in the alien language. Jake heard heavy footsteps behind him getting closer. He ducked into a side corridor, one he had noticed 3 days ago. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a human. The Dominion soldiers were too big to follow. He kept moving, squeezing through tight spaces, climbing through what might have been ventilation shafts. His ribs screamed with every movement. His lungs burned. But he did not stop. Jake had memorized the ship's layout as best he could during his captivity. He knew the communications room was on the upper level, near the front of the ship. He also knew that getting there would be almost impossible. Almost, not completely. He found a maintenance ladder and started climbing. The shaft was dark and smelled like oil and something else, something alien and strange. But it went up, and up was where he needed to go. 20 minutes later, covered in grease and breathing hard, Jake pushed open a panel and found himself in a small storage room. Through the door, he could hear voices, guards searching for him. He waited until the voices moved away, then slipped out and ran down the corridor. The communications room was exactly where he expected it to be. 2 technicians were inside, working at large screens filled with symbols Jake did not understand. They turned when he entered, their eyes wide with shock. Jake raised the stolen weapon. "Don't move! I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." They did not move. Jake walked to the main console and studied it. The symbols meant nothing to him, but he had seen the guards use similar panels throughout the ship. He found what looked like a communication control and pressed it. A voice spoke in the alien language. Jake ignored it. "This is Jake Morrison, United States Marine Corps, transmitting on emergency frequency 773. I am being held on a Dominion command ship. Grid coordinates follow." He read the numbers from a display he hoped showed their location. "This message is for Katie Morrison, United Earth Defense Council. Katie, it's Jake. I'm alive. Bring friends. And bring the good stuff." He recorded the message and set it to repeat on a loop. Then he did something that made him smile for the first time in weeks. During his interrogations, Jake had noticed that the Dominion had sensitive hearing. Certain sounds bothered them, made them flinch. He had filed that information away, waiting for the right moment. Now was the right moment. He found what looked like a music player on the technician's console. It took him a few tries, but he managed to connect it to the ship's main speakers. He searched through the files until he found one that had been downloaded from his own ship during the initial capture. Classic rock. American classic rock. Jake turned the volume all the way up. The first notes of Fortunate Son blasted through every speaker on the Dominion command ship. The two technicians collapsed, hands over their ears. Jake could hear screams echoing from the corridors outside. He grabbed the communication device from one of the fallen technicians and ran. For the next 30 minutes, Jake played the most dangerous game of his life. Hide and seek on an alien warship with thousands of soldiers hunting him while rock and roll blasted from every direction. He used maintenance shafts and storage rooms. He doubled back and laid false trails. He did everything his training had taught him about evasion and escape. But in the end, there were too many of them. They found him in a cargo bay near the bottom of the ship. He was surrounded, out of ammunition, bleeding from a dozen small wounds. Commander Vetharak himself came to see the capture. "Impressive," the commander said, his voice barely audible over the still-playing music. "No prisoner has ever escaped their cell before. You have caused significant damage to this vessel and injured 17 of my soldiers." Jake stood straight despite his exhaustion. "Is that all? I was hoping for more." Vetharak studied him with something that might have been respect. "Your message was sent. We could not stop it in time. If your people come for you, we will destroy them." Jake smiled, bloody and tired but unbroken. "You really shouldn't have done that." "Done what?" "Given them a reason to come. You just made this personal." The commander did not understand, but he would. They all would. Katie Morrison was 28 years old and worked as a communications officer for the United Earth Defense Council. She had spent 4 years listening to signals from deep space, hoping to hear something, anything, that proved humanity was not alone in the universe. She never expected to hear her brother's voice. The message came through at 3 in the morning, Earth time. Katie was half asleep at her console when the alert sounded. She put on her headphones and listened, and then she listened again because she could not believe what she was hearing. Jake. Her brother Jake, who had been missing for 3 weeks. Jake, who everyone assumed was dead. Jake, asking for help and telling her to bring the good stuff. Katie ran to her commanding officer. Within an hour, the message had reached the highest levels of Earth's government. Within 2 hours, a decision had been made. The Dominion had taken one of their own, and humanity was going to get him back. Commander Vetharak did not believe the humans would come. His intelligence report showed that Earth's military was small and primitive. They had a few warships, yes, but nothing that could challenge a Dominion patrol fleet. Coming for one prisoner would be suicide. He did not understand humans. The fleet arrived 4 days after Jake sent his message. They dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. 23 ships flying the flag of the United Earth Defense Council. At the center of the formation was the carrier Freedom's Call, the largest warship humanity had ever built. It was not as big as the Dominion vessels. It was not as elegant or as technologically advanced, but it was bristling with weapons that humans had spent decades developing specifically for this moment. Because humanity had known, ever since they first discovered evidence of other civilizations in the galaxy, that someone would eventually come, and they had prepared. Commander Vetharak stood on the bridge of his command ship and stared at the human fleet with growing unease. Something was wrong. The humans should have been running. They should have been begging for mercy. Instead, they had formed a battle line, weapons hot, shields raised. A communication signal came through. A young woman's face appeared on the screen. She had the same stubborn eyes as the prisoner, the same set to her jaw. "I am Lieutenant Katie Morrison of the United Earth Defense Council," she said. "You are holding my brother. I want him back." Vetharak leaned forward. "You cannot defeat us, human. We have 12 warships. Your fleet is outmatched. Surrender now, and we will be merciful." Katie smiled, and it was not a nice smile. Let me explain something about my people, Commander. We have a history of doing things that don't make sense. We crossed oceans in wooden boats. We landed on our moon with computers weaker than a children's toy. We built a nation out of wilderness and held it together through a civil war that killed millions of our own. She leaned closer to the screen. We don't care about the odds. We don't care about your technology or your 10,000 years of conquest. You took my brother. You hurt him. And now you're going to give him back, or we're going to take him back. Your choice. Vethorak should have listened. He should have remembered what his interrogators had told him about the human prisoner. He should have thought about the fact that Jake Morrison had spent 3 weeks resisting everything they threw at him. Instead, he gave the order to attack. The battle lasted 2 hours. It should have been a massacre, with the Dominion's superior numbers and technology crushing the human fleet easily. But humans did not fight like other species. They fought dirty. Their weapons targeted life support systems and engine cores instead of shields and armor. Their pilots flew patterns that no sane species would attempt, accepting damage to their own ships in exchange for better shots at the enemy. They adapted in real time, changing tactics every few minutes until the Dominion commanders could not predict what they would do next. And when one human ship was destroyed, the others did not retreat. They got angrier. By the end of the second hour, the Dominion had lost 4 ships. 3 more were too damaged to fight. The human fleet had lost 7 vessels, but the survivors were still coming, still shooting, still refusing to stop. Commander Vethorak stood on his bridge and watched his fleet being torn apart by creatures half his size. "Sir," one of his officers said quietly, "we should retreat." Vethorak wanted to argue. He had never retreated from any battle in his life. The Dominion did not retreat, but the Dominion had never fought humans before. "Signal the human fleet," he said finally. "Tell them we accept their terms." Jake heard about the surrender from his cell. A guard came to tell him, looking at him with something that might have been fear. "Your people are here. We are releasing you." Jake stood up slowly. His body was broken, held together by bandages and stubborn will, but he was smiling. "Told you they would come." They took him to the shuttle bay, where a small craft with Earth markings was waiting. The door opened and Katie ran out, throwing herself into his arms with enough force to make his ribs scream. "Jake! Oh my God, Jake! I thought you were dead! I thought we lost you!" He hugged her back, ignoring the pain. "I'm okay, Katie. I'm okay." Takes more than a bunch of overgrown lizards to keep a Morrison down. She pulled back and looked at him, at the bruises and scars and the weight he had lost. "What did they do to you?" "Everything they could think of. Didn't work." He grinned. "Turns out we're tougher than we look." Commander Vethorak watched the shuttle depart. High Arbiter Solène stood beside him, her silver scales dim with exhaustion. "We underestimated them," she said quietly. "Yes. What do we do now?" Vethorak was silent for a long moment. Then he turned away from the window. "We leave, and we add a new entry to our database. Humanity. Species classification. Do not engage. Not worth the resources required for conquest." "Is that what you believe?" He thought about the human who had resisted every interrogation technique they had, who had escaped from a cell designed to hold creatures 10 times his strength, who had smiled even when he was beaten and bloody and alone. "No," he said finally. "The truth is simpler. They cannot be conquered. Their minds do not accept it as possible, and trying to force them will only make them fight harder." Solène nodded slowly. "I will note that in my report." 6 months later, Jake was back on a repaired Lone Star with Danny Reyes, running salvage operations in deep space. The only new addition to the ship was a small American flag mounted above the pilot's seat. Danny looked at the flag and shook his head. "You know that thing's going to confuse any aliens we meet, right?" Jake leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Good. Let them be confused. Let them ask questions. And when they do, I'll tell them exactly what it means. What's that? Jake looked out at the stars, thinking about 3 weeks of darkness and pain and an empire that thought it could break him. It means we don't give up. Ever. No matter what. It means that somewhere out there are people who will come for you when you're in trouble. It means that the Dominion has conquered 600 species in 10,000 years. But they took one look at us and decided we weren't worth the effort. He turned to his friend with a grin. It means we're American, Danny. And that means something. Outside, the stars stretched on forever, filled with dangers and wonders that humanity was only beginning to discover. Somewhere in that vastness, the Galactic Dominion continued its conquest, swallowing worlds and crushing resistance. But they gave human space a very wide berth, because now they understood. Some species were just not worth the trouble.